Hey guys, welcome back to Subscriber Stories. I know I haven't done one of these in a while, but don't worry, I'm going to be making this a regular thing. So without further ado, let's delve right in, shall we? In the year 1972, my younger sister and I were forced to move from our home in Norway to go live in the UK. My mother had just married an Englishman who had 4 children of his own, and they were expecting another one. It was a miserable time for me, because at 6 years old, I had not begun school yet in Norway, so consequently I spoke no English. I had also been forced to leave my father and beloved grandparents behind, and my own mother was more interested in her new husband than any of her children. My childhood was the unhappiest time of my life, and this was only exasperated by the experiences in the manor house in which we moved to. The old manor house was situated in a seaside town. From the outside, it was the picture postcard of the British countryside. A large lawn surrounding the driveway leading to the house. A glass greenhouse, stables around the back, and horses in the paddock. But behind this facade, we experienced such horrors, some that I still struggle to talk about to this day. Us children all experienced paranormal activity, particularly at night, and it left us exhausted. Our parents were not particularly concerned and often shut us out. All we had were each other, and it was terrifying. You dreaded sleep and the activity that would come with it. I would sleep with my dog and cat on the bed, but even they could not bring me enough comfort. One night, when I was around 9 years old, I was awoken by my dog standing near the bedroom window growling. The cat was standing with her back arched and fur standing on end, hissing loudly. All of a sudden though, my dog whimpered, and then suddenly there was silence. The room went cold, and the darkness seemed to engulf us. I got out of my bed shaking in fear and crept towards my bedroom window, where my dog was now crouching, ears pinned down to her head. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I reached the blacked-out curtains. I peeked out to see if there was an animal in the front yard that could have startled the cat or dog, but I saw nothing. I craned my neck and looked beyond the greenhouse. Again, there was nothing. I sighed. I took a step back and went to draw the curtain. But then, suddenly, everything happened at once. The dog started barking ferociously and frothing at the mouth, and my bedroom door swung open and slammed hard against the wall. My posters then flew off the walls. I turned back to the window and I saw the face of a man smiling menacingly at me. Terrified, I spun around expecting to see someone who stood behind me. But when I did, there was no one there. I turned back to the window, and it was gone. All that was left was the fog imprint from the outside of the window, as if someone had had their face pressed up against it and was looking in. My room was on the 2nd floor, and no one could have reached that far without a ladder. Since that day, I have never forgotten that face. But the activity continued. I would wake up nearly every morning with my posters littered all over the floor, and would spend the first part of my day pinning them back up. It was relentless. My parents never believed me, but after months of torment, I refused to leave my mother's bed at night. It was then when my stepfather was forced to sleep in my bedroom for a night, and only after he experienced it for himself did he believe me. When he woke up in the morning, all of my posters were laying skewed on top of him. Despite all of this, there was one thing that did bring me comfort during my miserable childhood. I always missed my family in Norway dearly and cried myself to sleep most nights. But then one night, I felt a light touch brush beside my hair from my face. This simple and intimate action brought me so much comfort. I opened my eyes and saw an older woman sitting beside me. She had grey hair swept back into a tight bun, and now reflecting on the clothes that she wore, I suspect that she was once a maid or the head of the house. After all, this was a very old large manor house. She would visit me often, and always brought this feeling of familiarity and comfort. Although I knew that she wasn't alive like you or I did feel that she kept me safe from the man that I saw at my window. I was not the only child in that house to have a paranormal experience either. My younger sister Ella shared a room with our stepsister Marie, and she would awake nightly with fits of terror and sweat, and she would often come into my room and curl up in my bed, frightened with me. I only had a small single bed, and with a dog, cat, and now her kittens, it became too much to have her in my bed with me. So one night, when the usual routine of night terrors and her crawling into my bed had occurred, I told her to go to our mother's bed instead, insisting that I would take her there. I held her hand, and we left my room and went onto the landing. My mother and stepfather's room was at the very end of the hallway, and right next to it, there was a very large Victorian mirror. We could see our reflections as we crept along the corridor and were careful not to wake up our sleeping siblings. Then suddenly, Ella stopped, frozen. I looked down at her and tugged her arm. Unresponsive, she stared ahead at the mirror. My heart sank and I became overwhelmed with a feeling of dread. Slowly I looked up. There in the mirror, we saw the back of a maid pushing a service trolley. She was moving towards us. We belted back to my room and hid under the quilt. We heard the squeaking of wheels pass us and stop. We didn't dare to look, and we stayed there until morning. I will never forget these events. Number 2. Some family friends of mine were looking into buying a new house and moving in together since they had been dating for a few years now. They found a house that was in their price range and in a good location, so they contacted the local estate agent and arranged to meet him in front of the house one morning to look around it. When they arrived though, there was no sign of the estate agent's car, but they decided to knock on the door anyway in case he was waiting inside. After knocking, a small old woman opened the door and looked at them expectantly. "Oh, we're sorry. We didn't know that anyone else was looking at the house today. Is it alright if we come in?" they asked. The lady didn't respond. She just stood to one side to allow them to come in. The whole time that they were looking around, the old lady would always stay in the same room as them and appeared to be looking at them more than at the house. After they had finished looking at the property, they walked out of the door, and as they were approaching their car, they saw the estate agent pull up beside them. The estate agent asked if they were ready to see the house and apologized for the delay. And then they replied that they'd already seen the house and that they'd been looking at it with the old lady as well. The agent looked at them perplexed and said that no one else was scheduled to look at the house today and that he had the only key to the door. They led him to the porch and tried opening the door to show him that he was mistaken, only to find it locked. They didn't buy the house. Number 3. Almost 2 years ago, I was a young female of 21 years old looking for some work to pay off for my student loan. Luckily for me, I found a job at a pharmacy in my downtown shopping mall. Me and a group of 10 others were tasked with transferring stock from the old store to their new location within the mall. The job was tedious, but considering that I was being paid for transporting cases of stock from their stockroom in the basement up to the new store upstairs, the work wasn't so bad. Well, with a tote box in hand that needed to be transferred upstairs, I, like everyone else, just used the freight elevator for convenience. The elevator, like all other freight elevators, was massive and was used by businesses within the mall to transport stock from their inventory to their stores. The elevator, being quite old, had graffiti etched into the walls and would creak and clang with it when it was operated. It was nearing the end of my shift one day, and not being very used to the eerie elevator, I entered with a bit of hesitation. I pressed the button to go up to the main door and had to pull down the top grate of the elevator, as it was common that it would get jammed, and did so at that moment. The elevator slowly started moving upwards, passing levels as it went by, which I could see through the little window of the door. It was not much later that the elevator came to a screeching halt at the 7th floor. The doors slowly opened, but the strangest part was that where I would have been waiting half expectantly for someone to have got on the elevator, there was no one. I peered out the elevator for a second, just to check if anyone had pressed the button requesting it, but no one was in sight on that floor. I thought it was a bit strange. Perhaps they got bored of waiting and had gone elsewhere. So I pressed the button to close the doors and continue to my floor. As the doors began to close though, a tall man with copper curly hair and a black puffy coat came bounding into the elevator with a huff. Being the kind girl that I am, I acknowledged him with a small smile and a nod, and moved to the far right of the elevator shaft, close to the control panel to give him space. I pressed the close door button more than once, and then the elevator continued upwards, not speaking to the strange man. I then began to notice him shuffling closer and closer to me. It was very strange. I gave him plenty of room and he was practically on the other end earlier. And yet, as the elevator slowly ascended, he felt the need to move closer to me. It was getting to the point that we were almost standing shoulder to shoulder. Then, he spoke in a very calm and low tone. "Today must be my lucky day. The elevator never stops on my floor. I never catch the elevator in time." Looking up at him and seeing the best in people, I laughed nervously and replied to him, "Yeah." It was at that point that it started to get freakishly close. It was almost as if we were chest to chest with nothing but a tote box separating us. It was in this moment that reality hit me. This man was making me feel very uncomfortable and was giving me a very creepy vibe. My heart began to pound in my chest as the reality that I was in this scary elevator alone with this creepy man truly hit me. As I moved closer to the wall, as he crept into my personal space, I began to think about what I could use to defend myself if he began attacking me. The only weapon or tool that I had was this tote box. It was very flimsy, and it was just a barrier between him and I. I glanced at the control panel and watched as the numbers of the floor levels changed painstakingly slow. I prayed that we would reach my floor soon, as I was afraid that he was going to do something terrible to me. The man just stared maniacally into my soul, as if contemplating what to do to me. My entire body began to shake, and my heart felt as if it would burst out my chest. I was just so scared. Just as soon as I accepted the situation and prepared myself to fight back, the elevator screeched to a stop on my floor. The doors slowly creaked open to 4 individuals waiting to enter. I let out a breath that I had been holding in the entire ride, as I was so relieved to see other people. One young woman glanced down at me on the elevator as it opened, and looked at the man and smiled and said, "Hey, how are you?" And the creepy man reacted like a switch had been turned off inside him, smiled back excitedly and responded, "Hey." It was at that point that the group entered the elevator, and I took the opportunity to bolt out the doors and back to the pharmacy. When I got home, I felt shaky and terrified. I could not get the image of this man's creepy smile out of my head. I didn't want to after that day, but I remained at the job as I desperately needed the money. But I never went into the elevator alone, and I always carried an X-Acto knife in my pocket just to be safe. But I never did see that man again. There have been several assaults in the downtown area since then, and whenever I would hear these stories, I would always wonder to myself if these were ever connected, in part, to that man with the curly hair and the creepiest smile. Number 4. My parents used to live in a different house before I was born. It was a very old house, rather cold and drafty and creaky like most houses are. But one night, something very strange happened to my mother. My dad had gone out with his friends one evening, leaving my mother home alone. It was around 9:30, and my mum hears a car pull up into the driveway and sees the lights flashing into the house. She finds it very strange. It was a very early time for my dad to get home. She thought maybe he decided to come home early for some reason, but became more freaked out when the light to the laundry room, where the back door leads to, turned on by itself, and she swore she could see the outline of someone inside that room from underneath the door. It was at that moment that her cat started hissing and growling at the door, which was very unusual since she wouldn't hiss at anyone she didn't know. It was beginning to grow incredibly tense, and after a minute or so, my mum decided to open the door to see what was going on, only to find the room completely empty with the light on. The only way to turn on that light is from the inside of that room. She stood there confused, and then went to have a look at the car in the driveway as no one had opened the front door. There was no one there. And there was no way a car could have got out without making a sound. She still has no idea what it could have been. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I want to extend a special thanks to all the brave subscribers for sharing their stories with us today. I am planning on making this a regular thing, so if you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it over to my email, which you can find in the description below, for a chance to have it read on a future video. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to smash that like button and subscribe, as you won't want to miss what I have for you next. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Mortis Media for some cool behind the scenes stuff. But for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.